Don't move. Turn your fantasy football into reality. Here's CJ.
It's going to be a great show. Today's show, as promised, has intrigue, thieving, scandalous behavior, treachery, deception, all those good things that go into your fantasy football draft. First thing, if you're going to expect your mail or your question to be read on this show, start it off like this. Hey CJ, big fan of the show. That'll probably get it on every time. But this is a question from Tamby in California, and guess how he starts it? Hey CJ, big fan of the show. If you have somebody during your draft who's picking right before or after you, and they're continuously taking the players that you're targeting, how do you counter that? That's actually a pretty good question, and that's where the skullduggery and deceit and so forth comes into play here, and strategy. I'll call it strategy. How's that? The first thing you do is just get to know the other guys in your league and what the tendencies of those people are. In other words, send a message, say, hey, how's it going? How's your summer? So forth, just a little conversation. And during that conversation, just try to, pull a little information out of them. Like, hey, what do you think of your wide receivers? I've got lots. Do you need one? Oh, no, I've got great wide receivers, but I do need a running back. Well, guess what he's more inclined to be after? Running backs in the draft. So as you play with these guys and girls and talk to them and ladies and so forth, I want to be politically correct here. The idea is that get to know the people in your league, their tendencies. And if you're playing in more than one league and some of the same people, then you'll see who they drafted in the other leagues and how they run their teams in that league. And it'll probably apply the same in this league. So if you know who you're battling against, then you'll know what the tendencies are. So to combat them taking your players, what I do, I never really get too upset if the player I want is gone, because I set a list prior to the draft. If it's a 50-player rookie draft, then I try to set a list of 50 players. And I put them in little groups, like, 5 quarterbacks that I wouldn't mind having, and maybe 15 running backs, 20 wide receivers, and 5 tight ends. And I stick to that list. But if I'm 8 picks away, what I'll do with that list is I'll narrow it down to the 8 that I'd like to have. And number 8 is the one I expect to get. So every time that someone drafts, if someone doesn't take one of those players that I had targeted, now I've got my 7, my 6, my 5, and sometimes my 4 or whatever. So a lot of times I'll get to that pick and I've still got 5 or 6 to choose from. And at that point, I'll try to trade back. But what I've done there is I've basically put myself in a position where I don't really care who you take, because I'm expecting you to take one of the guys that's ahead of the guy that I'm looking at. But I try not to target one guy and as a must, I gotta have. If there is a guy out there that you gotta have, then what you need to do is either take that player early or make a deal and trade up. My preference there is to take the player early. Now, my world, there is no such thing as taking a player early if you're comparing it to ADP. Average draft position. That doesn't mean a thing. It doesn't mean a thing. You look at the app and the average draft position is listed. Who should go next? Who the majority of people have been taking next. If you take that ADP and you take a screenshot of it and compare it to the end of the season, that's not even close to how those players did in fantasy football. ADP is made up of about 60% of the people who are drafting who have no idea what they're doing. They don't do any research. They don't listen to podcasts. They don't watch shows like this. They don't do any research into their picks. They just simply look at ADP and go, well, I need a running back, I'll take that guy. And that's it. So there's a majority, that, not a majority, but there's a good portion of your league that will draft like that, and you can't do anything about that. But as far as people taking the player that you want, make sure you have more than one player that you want is the easiest solution there. Either that or communicate with those people and figure out what exactly they want. And if you know they're going to take your guy around early or trade up. Use some strategy. Be a little deceitful, scandalous, like play the game a little bit. So I don't mean, there's been times where I've sent trades out to people and, they've said, what do you offer me that for? I said, well, I looked at your wide receivers and I think you need a wide receiver. Well, I don't need a wide receiver. My wide receivers are great. Fair enough. I know you're not taking a wide receiver. Then it starts that conversation. So that's what it's all about, is having the conversation with your league mates, knowing who they are, knowing what their tendencies are. And the other thing too is if the guy drafting before or after you, if it's a snake draft, he's coming back the other way, if both those guys have Green Bay Packer helmets as their team icon, and one's called Packers Are Great and the other one's called Packers Forever, you know that they're going to take Packers. So if you're wanting a Packer, you're going to have to go early and take that guy before they get to him. So there's little clues. If there's guys from Cincinnati, if a guy's from Miami, you know what? They're likely to want to take guys in their team realm. If a guy's from Cincinnati, he's not going to take a Pittsburgh guy. They just have that little thing going there. So there's little twists and things like that, and you can use that to your advantage. And it's not really scandalous. It's just knowing the odds, knowing who's there and what their tendencies are. And if you're in more than one draft, you see how the players go and you see who's taking who. And it's just one of those things where if you're prepared and you have a list and you keep track of who's going and likely to go where and what teams need, it's not uncommon for me to look at a draft and see I'm 5 picks away and I need a quarterback. Am I worried that someone's going to take a quarterback? Maybe a little. But when I look at the guys that are coming up and they all have quarterbacks, one needs a wide receiver, 2 need tight ends, and another guy needs a wide receiver. Now I'm less worried about someone taking my guy. They might, but I don't think more than one will. So I'll have like 3 or 4 quarterbacks there. I just like to be prepared so that if someone does take a player that I'm kind of targeting, I've got another one. And I think that's what it's all about, is having a choice and having an alternative. And when someone takes a player that I want, okay, bang, I got another one. And that's how it works. I hope that answered your question, Tammy. Good question. And hey, if you have questions that we can answer on the show, just send them in. Sometimes we give away gifts. On our next show, we're going to announce who the winners of the Bo Jackson and the Barry Sanders cards are from 1991. In the meantime, have yourselves a phenomenal afternoon. I know I will.